And as promised, SABC News correspondent in London, Holly Hudson, joining us now. Holly, this has implications. I mean, Boris Johnson, when he came in, some accused him of being a Trump light, of emulating the US president. Then there was this relationship with the French president, Emmanuel Macron, that soured. This whole relationship between the US and Europe, the US accused of foregoing its foes under Trump presidency. Lay out the stakes here for Europe and that formerly a special relationship.
Yes, well, this special relationship, as we always hear, between the UK and the US is more vital, but for the UK now than ever, of course. With Brexit on the horizon, the UK needs to strengthen its ties outside of the EU and, crucially, boost trade. So what is at stake here for the UK, of course, is just that, a massive trade deal as Donald Trump promised. But as yet, those negotiations are proving difficult. So in terms of whether a Biden administration might actually prioritise the UK, we could potentially see the UK go from a president that has promised this massive lucrative trade deal to one in Biden that has recently ruled one out over a move made by the UK government, which he sees as compromising what is known as the Northern Ireland peace process. Now, Joe Biden has strong Irish roots, and he was crucially an opponent of Brexit. Donald Trump, of course, strongly endorsed it and supported it. So there are pros and cons to this, and the same on the continent as well. Now, the relationship between the EU and the US has, of course, taken a battering over the past 4 years with Donald Trump. He is seen as somebody who sunders alliances, incites sort of geopolitical havoc in many ways. He's pulled out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the Paris Accord. He's withdrawing funding from the World Health Organization, pulled out of the Iran nuclear agreement. So on the continent, perhaps particularly among France, in France and Germany, Joe Biden is seen as that potentially more stable, traditional leader, somebody who understands the value of those traditional alliances, who is more transatlantic minded, and perhaps somebody who is easy to deal with and might be able to repair the damage that has been done to the relationship over the past 4 years.
All right, so some hopes for a Biden win. I mean, we've also been reporting that the UK heading into a lockdown, and across Europe we're seeing this resurgence. Presumably all European leaders will be looking at the US now and seeing how sort of COVID-19 affects and plays out in this election, how Trump is punished or rewarded for the way he has dealt with the pandemic.
Yes, of course, because as much as political leaders here in Europe may either hope for a Biden win or a Trump win, there is no denying the amount of support that Trump caught in the US. Of course, winning the 2016 election was a huge surprise, but he does have a massive support base in the US, something that the EU and the UK cannot ignore. And going forward, it will be interesting to see, obviously, if he does win the White House for another 4 years, how he handles the coronavirus crisis going forward. In terms of the perception here in Europe, particularly in the UK, of course, there's been a sort of swell of distrust, really, of the US president. When you talk to the wider public on the ground here about the US election, most people do tend to swing in favour of Joe Biden. That is maybe because he is more liberal leaning, and they tell you that they don't really trust Donald Trump. He's, of course, a widely controversial, divisive figure here in the UK. Particularly, there were huge protests, you may remember, against his state visits last year and over his visit the year before. And a survey has come out today which shows that every constituency in the UK would in fact support Biden. However, that is not to say that Donald Trump does not have his supporters here. And of course, as you mentioned before, he does have a friend in Boris Johnson, as he continually says. He once referred to Johnson as a Britain Trump, and they heap praise. The leaders heap praise on each other. And there is an argument that the UK has courted Donald Trump over the past 4 years. The short answer being Brexit and that need to maintain the special relationship. So that really does hang in the balance, perhaps, going forward over the next 4 years.
All right, an interesting European perspective. Let's take you to the ground. Can we bring you in, Sherwin, in New York? We were speaking to our correspondent earlier, saying that retailers are boarding up their doors. Some businesses are even fearing protests. And Sherwin, you've really laid out the stakes for us and explained why this could be a long, drawn-out process, the results coming in potentially for days. Give us a sense, because of that anxiety, just give us a sense of the mood in the US from your perspective a day before the US goes to the polls.
Well, this is a very divided country anyway, has been for many years, Francis. Different political persuasions, differing political positions, from Supreme Court justices to how the economy should function, to the coronavirus pandemic and whether wearing masks is an effective way of mitigating the spread of this virus or not. So on a fundamental, on a broad-based basis, there are disagreements, but also on the nitty-gritty things. And so what you've seen for the first time in this country is businesses in major cities, including New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Miami, boarding up their front of stores, their windows, essentially with plywood to protect them from what they believe could be post-election violence. We've done interviews with experts that talk about, this country's democracy being on a precipice, that it could go left or right very, very easily here. And what you have from certain leaders in this country is literally pouring gasoline or petrol on a burning fire already. And so when the President of the United States casts aspersions and tries to sow discord in terms of how this election process might unfold, particularly as to whether we will get an election result on the election night, remember there's been a huge volume of mail-in ballots. Over 91 million people have voted already. Some 67% of the people that turned out in the entire election in 2016. So we're seeing a great deal of enthusiasm, which in itself is really good for democracy. But the concern is that if we don't, for example, if we look at the state of Pennsylvania, the first time that Pennsylvania, Francis, has done wholesale mail-in ballots due to the pandemic. And the concern there is that in Pennsylvania, in terms of electoral law, you are only allowed to open those mail-in ballots on election day, November 3rd. So from 7 a.m. Tomorrow, you have piles of millions and millions of ballots that have been received already, and election officials are not allowed to touch them until election day. So what electoral officials in Pennsylvania are saying is we might have a delay on election night. We might not have a full picture of the results based on the volumes of mail-in ballots that have to be opened, stacked up, and then processed in terms of the count. So when the president talks about, it's not good to get, if we don't get a result on election night, that is meaningless, because electoral law does not prescribe that the results should be known on election night. This is, newscasters calling an election, saying based on the trends, based on the demographics, based on the number of people in certain precincts that support A or B, we can predict that this candidate is going to win. But election results are only usually certified even as far as a week later. So the aspersions that the president is trying to cast here is without merit, just based on the history of the United States. We might not know the election result on election night, but that doesn't mean that it's a fraudulent process that has been undertaken. So a lot of anxiety, a great deal of fear. We're told that apartment blocks are locking their doors at night because they're concerned that people might try to break in to apartment blocks here based on whatever might happen on election night. So more unknowns than knowns at this point, Francis.
All right, well, you, we know, are going to be a very busy man, Sherwin. We look forward to chatting to you tomorrow. And as those sort of trends at least start emerging in coming days, we've run out of time. But very quickly, Sophie, can you just lay out how the SABC will be covering this US election?
Well, of course, Sherwin Bryce-Pease is based in New York. He will continuously give us updates the whole day, tomorrow evening, South African time. And also we'll have Nick Harper, who's following Joe Biden. And, of course, Kate Fisher and Nina Potts will be following Donald Trump. In London, we'll continuously check in Europe what's happening. We'll check Asia. We'll check Africa to ensure that we get a better sense of the elections in the United States of America and the reaction.
All right, a global perspective on the US election tomorrow and live coverage from the ground. Thank you very much tonight to our panelists, Holly Hudson from London, our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, and Sophie Mokoena, international editor here at the SABC.